Okay, great, good. Hi, fantastic. So I like to go in slowly because there still are people joining us that can't be here perfectly on time. Right. So let's just move this out the way. So what I wanted to look at today was stuckness. And this work really came from the research for my doctorate. So it's very existential in orientation because the doctorate was in existential psychotherapy. And while the maturity work hooks in and relates to this, this is a very much an existential project. So I'm going to look at what happens to us when we get stuck, when we become bewitched, amputated, or dead. So I thought we could start off as I liked. I mean, here are my intentions. We don't need to look at that for too long. Let's have a look at this. It's much more exciting. And then we can try and get an idea of what you want out of this session as well. So as usual, I'd love you to go off in breakaway rooms for about 15, 20 minutes and have a think about your experience of stuckness. I'm not going to give you a definition. Just try and figure out what that means for you. What does stuckness mean for you? How does it feel? Do you have examples of it? Would you mind sharing them? Did you get stuck more than once? How long were you stuck for? How did you stop feeling stuck? And if you want to share, what did it feel like when you were stuck? So it's a very sort of broad discussion around what is it like to be stuck from your perspective. I'm going to put you in breakout rooms, and I will 7 breakout rooms, 21/8. So I'm going to assign you automatically. So are you all clear what you have to do? Talk about your own experience of stuckness, anything you learned, what's it like, etc., etc. And I will send people into the rooms with you when they arrive. So you've got, let's say, till 4:30. Cool. Okay, goodbye.
That to know.
Sorry, I forgot me buggering it up again.
Yeah, but just like, how do you know you're stuck and what does that mean?
Lovely.
And
Yeah.
for me, stuckness is not at all external. It's being stuck in the Enneagram 7 trance, which doesn't look stuck at all. But that's the stuckness. It's like I cannot stop.
Yeah. Lovely. All of those things feed in. And just to, I mean, I'm not going to really use the Enneagram in this session, but you've absolutely seen the map. The only time I kind of thought about the Enneagram with this research was I had one Enneagram 7 participant. So everyone else got stuck in one place, and the Enneagram 7s just kept moving another place, another place, another place, another place, another place. So 2 different kind of patterns of stuckness with the 7s. So thank you. Stuckness is fluidity for the 7s sometimes. Yeah. Did anybody not have an experience of stuckness? No one. Everybody's been stuck. And has everybody been stuck more than once? Great. Good. Excellent. Any other comments?
I'm sorry, Julia, did you ask, has everybody been stuck more than once?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I was saying to the people I was with, to Kim and Karen, that I've never been stuck before. I'm stuck now, but I've never been stuck before. So for me, this is a very new experience. And I think before I've always just, I know you say sevens move, I know we're trying not to bring the Enneagram in, but I just take action. I just do things, and I've never been stuck before. I feel like I've never had time or a chance to be stuck before, but now I'm incredibly stuck, and it's incredibly uncomfortable because I'm not I'm stuck for a while now. Like when I say a while, not 10 years, but a few years, like at least 2 years. Yeah.
Lovely. Jackie, thank you for that. And how do you know that you are stuck? Is it because it's painful?
Yeah, because I feel like I want to be somewhere that's not here, but I don't know where I want to be as well. And also I'm not sure which direction I want to go in. And if I move in that direction, I'm afraid I'm going to go the wrong way. And I'm going to expend energy and on something that I find out, in 2 years' time is in the wrong direction. So it's like it's like a loss of trust and a breakdown of knowledge of what everything I thought I knew. So, yeah.
So do you think that you might have been stuck before, but didn't feel the pain?
Yeah, well, interestingly, because Kim's explanation of her feeling of stuckness was different to mine. And then I realized, well, I've been stuck before, but I've never thought of it as stuck. I've just thought, I have to, action something, I suppose. So I suppose my way of dealing would always be action. I don't have that method. So now I'm realizing the stuckness, perhaps. Yeah.
It's interesting. That is one of the things that came out of the research, was that people only know they're stuck when it starts getting painful. And that's why it can last for so very, very, very long. Any last comments on this before I skip to the slides?
Yeah. Last comment. So just if I want to dumb it down, right? You're stuck because you want to go somewhere. So where is it that you want to go? Isn't that the question you need to ask yourself in terms of like, what's the purpose of, whatever it is? I mean, for me, in my particular situation was that it's a particular goal I want to achieve, and I was getting nowhere with that goal. So I knew that I've got all this stuff coming to me, but goal not achieved by the time I was supposed to achieve it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. That's great, because that definitely comes into the research, and hopefully I can answer that question for you. Anyone else? No?
Julia, I just wanted to add something there.
Yeah.
It's interesting that Alistair says that, because in our conversation with Ingrid and Pete, one of the things for me in terms of when Ingrid asked me, how do I know that I'm feeling stuck? I said, like, not even a clear goal came to mind. So that fogginess in my mind, like that lack of clarity. So maybe for Alistair, in terms of where he's at, in terms of his stuckness or what he experienced, it was not being able to achieve that goal, but still having a goal in mind. Where for me, I felt like, or I still do feel like there's a lot of fogginess. So it's almost even challenging to get to that let's say, goal.
Yeah.
You know, so it's that constant questioning of everything.
Yeah, beautiful. So that's some of the experience of being stuck.
Yes.
Is this questioning that goes on. Why don't I have traction? So
Yeah.
perfect. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for that. I'm moving through this quite quickly because I want to cover quite a bit. So just really, this research is for my doctoral thesis, comes from interviews with 10 executives, including 3 CEOs, all South African, 9 were white. And I wanted to look at, I wanted to try and remove some of the dynamics of race out of the sample group. And so I wanted to look at white people who I thought would have the upper hand in corporates or would be less likely to feel outsiders. Anyway, that was all very interesting. And I'll talk about how that turned out shortly. Constructive grounded theory, and what I'm going to give you today is very existential in orientation and very sort of summary. But if you want the references, I'm happy to give them to you. I'm going to give you mainly today the results of the research and how you can use them in your life or with coaching clients. You cool? Ready to roll? Okay, so this I thought I'd put up front because it just kind of positions us in this whole field of stuckness, and you're welcome to the slides later. So it's generally non-pathological. You know, all of you have had experienced it. It recurs over lives. It's unavoidable. And it's an impasse between a person and a context. And in the context of this research, a leader and an organization. The process is enabled by 3 losses. And that's what we're going to look at today as a way to support you to become more fluid. So there's a loss of self and one's capacity to self-reflect. There's a loss of relationship and a loss of meaning. These 3 things create stuckness in a leader, and it means that the leader cannot adapt. So when the context changes, they get stuck, they lose traction, and this makes many leaders very angry. So this process can take up, I think one of my participants was 12 years in this. So by the time you're getting to the end of the stuck process, you are very cross. And by this time, leaders have already started to take revenge in organizations, outbursts, thefts, nepotism, all sorts of ways to punish the organization for the situation that they're in. And often they get fired rather than leave. So leaders only notice stuckness when it gets painful. Most of them are narcotized, and it can go on for a very long time. And I think this is not just leaders, but people in general. Pete, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to ask you, Julia, is that the 3 losses, do all 3 need to be present, or is it any one or any combination?
I think all 3, Pete. I'm going to look at them in more depth now and how that works. But I think they must all be there, and they seem to follow in a very specific order. So, yeah, there's something quite profound about the first stage that I'll talk to. So it can go on for years, and it has great benefits. Can you believe it? Stuckness can kickstart your relationship to yourself, can make you work with your uniqueness and the gifts you bring more effectively. It's actually a brilliant thing to get stuck. The problem is when you stay stuck too long. So that's just a broad overview. And this is a map of the process of stuckness. So I'm just going to talk you through this, and then we'll look at the 3 losses in more detail. So generally what happens is people enter organizations with a lot of hope. They want to have a good time, make a good impact, grow, learn, develop. But they bring in with them their attachment patterns and their socialization and their way of being in the world. And so they get quite used to merging with other people and losing parts of themselves in order to be successful in a context. And we'll come to this more fully. But in this first stage, they lose themselves, they fit in more fully, and they perform. And this is great. And it can go on for a while. But what happens is that the context inevitably changes. And this is an external context or an internal context, and sometimes both. And what happens is when you've lost so much of yourself in the previous step, you lack the agility to adapt to the changing context. So you almost get trained as a leader to be a one-trick pony. And when the context changes, you can't adapt. And it becomes really frustrating as you keep doing the same old behavior, trying to get traction in the world. The world thinks you are not responding effectively and starts mistreating you. And in South Africa, this really speaks to bullying, because bullying is so huge in our organizations. It is actually, in some ways, the mainstay of management in this country. I was quite shocked to look at the bullying and sexism and racism that people experienced in organizations. But at this stage, what happens is leaders are no longer effective. The relationship with the organization breaks up. All parties become disgruntled. People don't get help. And so they move into the third stage where they lose meaning. And when people lose meaning, they lose direction. And so generally, when people have lost meaning, you know that they're at the end of the cycle and that something has got to give. It's quite a useful coaching model to explore with clients. You know, how much of themselves have they lost? How many relationships do they still have in the workplace? And how meaningful is the work? And then dependent on which one is most pronounced, you know which part of the cycle your client's in, and then you know which part to work with. So that's the basic model. Any questions? Because now I'm going to go in a little bit deeper. Right. Okay, so the problem with being bewitched, amputated, or dead is that you land up with an incredibly narrow inner world. And this means that you almost become like an object in the Biko or Sartre or Fanon or even Heideggerian sense of the word. So you become an object with very limited range of behaviors. Some of the ways in which existential theorists describe how we lose ourselves is we follow the herd, we become inauthentic, we act in bad faith, people look at us with expectation and we take it in. We become objectified and objectify ourselves. We shame ourselves. We can be scapegoated, very critical, or the outsider. These are all limited identities. Sedimentation and mineralization is a Merleau-Ponty and Spinelli idea that we start kind of losing parts of ourselves and just become one inner core that doesn't really represent the complexity of who we are. Splitting and projection, I'm the good one and everyone else is bad. And if we have that sort of binary inner identity, that's a problem, because that cannot be the truth. Either I'm very good or I'm only bad. And trauma and addiction. These are, I found 19 ways in which you can lose yourself. It's pretty amazing. The vocabulary around losing oneself is spectacular. Anybody want to know more about any of these ways of losing oneself? I'm giving you such, yeah?
Sorry, can you talk a little bit more about when you say being objectified or objectifying self? I can understand being objectified with the role that you play in the organization, but that objectifying self, is that seeing yourself or attaching to that role? What were you thinking there?
So that comes from the work of Sartre, Jean-Paul Sartre and Steve Biko. So now I become I get trained into being an executive object, a corporate executive object. And this identity bleeds through into all of my life. And I think that's all I am. And I forget that I once was a potter or this or that. And my identity becomes really, really narrow. And I start taking on kind of symbols of being a perfect corporate object and internalizing them. I buy those high heel shoes with the red underside. I objectify myself. I put myself in the uniform, and that's all I am. It's like this one guy I worked with in manufacturing, that he completely internalized the lean manufacturing system, world-class manufacturing, and then he went out to go and find a world-class girlfriend. So he hadn't, considered her a broader object. She was just a world-class girlfriend in the same way, the manufacturing system. And I'm going to talk a little bit more, Karen, on that. Are you cool? Ingrid, yeah.
What I'm really noticing here, and it's, Enneagram-based insight again, is that there's a deep self-disconnection from a kind of fluid, centered consciousness that has a lot of freedom, and this the ego identification with almost an idealized ego that fits a context, or so we think, but it's very, very much the fixity that comes with that.
Yeah. Absolute loss of agility and responsiveness in the world. Yeah. Alistair, thank you.
Yeah. My question is more on the last one.
Attachment patterns or trauma.
The trauma part. I see you even had a link to trauma in your invite. Thank you for that. So is the question my question is, the leader, does he now get traumatized because of what's happening, or their underlying trauma resurfaces? That's what I'm trying to understand.
So I think the thing here is that trauma and addiction kind of work in a very similar kind of way, because they dominate your life, and they create behavioral routines, either around substances or around narcotizing or reliving trauma. And so it's a circular holding pattern, both of those things. And a lot of the trauma is because people can't release that trauma. And in South Africa, most of us are traumatized or have PTSD or versions of it. So trauma just holds you in a holding pattern. And so all you do is continue to relive the trauma until you can sort of melt it and create new behavioral patterns out of that.
Cool, thank you.
I want to talk a little bit about attachment patterns, because this was fascinating. I don't know how this happened, but it turned out that basically, I think 9 out of 10 of my sample group were the good children. And I think about 7 of them had these incredibly difficult and demanding mothers and were shamed as children. So this idea of shame was very strong in the groups, in the participants. They were all having conditional attachment patterns, which means they needed to do something to be loved. And they were used to doing things to getting what they wanted. So this trade-off was a pattern that they had from very early. I looked at quite a lot of the training that leaders went through and found that there was a lot of instructions in MBAs, in coaching and in leadership development about how to be a perfect executive object. And that most of these kind of initiatives that were supposed to be developing leaders were developing their transactional sides rather than their inner worlds. So it almost was encouraging them to value the transactional side and not develop the inner world. And of course, we know that that lands you up in stuckness. These guys were hardworking, stoic, so that when you beat them, they worked harder. They learned how to be autonomous as children, unemotional, and in control. They all describe themselves as unemotional. Then another fascinating subject that I'm just skating over here is this business of capitalist meaning making. There's a brilliant guy called Joel Voss who maps meaning making over the centuries, and he talks about capitalist meaning making. So you can understand what that might mean. It might mean materialism. It's a certain kind of self-exploration and self-development, but very often it lacks purpose or a social element or a transcendent element. You know, an element of when one feels one is part of a bigger thing, not just oneself. So in essence, what I'm saying here is that these guys, the way they made meaning was not terribly meaningful in the broader sense of the word. And this was another way in which they were buying into a system. So there's that lot on the one side. And on the other side, they're corporates who want people to fit in to the culture and the model of leadership that they advocate. And they use leaders as objects of utility, resources, and assets. So the inner world's not really valued, although that's a pretty radical statement because we as coaches know that that's not completely true. There is some valuing of the inner world, but broadly it's the transactional part of them that is valued by corporates. Also, the performance management system is not always clear and is riddled with agendas. That was a really interesting thing of, you know, how you manage senior leaders and how performance management is so connected into agendas. And then silence and compliance being especially rewarded at senior levels. So the more senior you are, the more you need to fit in and shut up. So what we get is this, which is I see it got, sorry, something happened there. It's a perfect dovetailing situation. So what happens is the leader understands relationships as conditional and corporate provides that for them. Leaders need to prove themselves and the corporate provides the opportunity. The leaders I interviewed often brought an inferior stroke outsider status, and corporate promised to remove that if utility was provided. The leaders were socialized and educated into viewing themselves through the lens of utility. What value can I add? And how can I measure it? And corporates loved that. They were alienated from themselves. They did not totally, I mean, that's a pretty sweeping statement, but broadly, these leaders were not really feeling their feelings. They often had poor relationships in organizations that were utilitarian, and they were striving for capitalist meaning making. An interesting part of the neoliberal capitalist system is that blame for error is always located in the individual, according to Wilson. So if something goes wrong in an organization, we immediately go, whose fault is it? We don't go, what has the system done here? And this means that the system remains intact and an opportunity for stuckness. So this table, while being a little bit dramatic, shows how people come into organizations perfectly primed for stuckness based on early attachment patterns. Any comments? Ingrid, yeah.
Me again. I'm very interested in this because in our executive coaching work, we have a very individualistic perspective usually on how to navigate the context, at the same time as trying to convince people that they can be authentic and self-reconnect in that existential, authenticity way and act in some kind of good faith. And I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts about that.
Well, it's really difficult because these guys that I interviewed, because I've got their data in my head, they have been playing this game since they were 3 years old. They are perfectly primed to be used as objects of utility. And these are the good children. This is what they know. This is how love is. This is the attachment pattern. I found it amazing how many of them had really hardcore mothers. Mothers that beat them or locked them in cupboards, or, they were shamed as children. And I think it's one of the, finding oneself is like a thing about lighting a tiny little flame somewhere and then hoping it'll catch a light. I don't think that there are any easy ways out, but so some of these leaders I've kept in touch with, and they this process of stuckness and the pain and being fired publicly and brutally, or even one nearly went to jail. So that kickstarts some kind of inner discovery. But then often, because they're very addicted to the benefits of corporate, they find it hard to find a new community and a new job, then they go back to using.
It's very interesting. I was listening to a podcast. Do you mind if I say something, or you got to get through some content here?
I've got quite a bit of content. I'm just looking at the time. Yeah. You're welcome to say it if it's quick. Yeah. Do you want to say it, Ingrid? No? Oh, you're okay. Okay, cool. Okay. So loss of engaged relationships. So the thing about relationships is that relationships allow us to connect to a world outside ourselves. And when we do that, we can get feedback, we can adapt our behavior, we can be validated, we can have other people kind of insert new identities into us that allow us to build our agility. And when we don't have relationships, we tend to become isolated, fearful, and defensive. And we start to narrow down our world to try and feel safe. So we lose out on our ability to take in other people's perspectives of the world. And this undermines our ability to have traction with other people. So if we continually connecting to people, we learn that we must use certain kinds of words to, hi Daniel, to, we must use certain kind of words to keep people interested. We need to weave our ideas in a way that makes sense for them. But if we stop connecting with people, we stop being able to connect to the world and we become less relevant. So, you know, I think a really good sort of coaching piece of work is around what relationships you have at work. Are you kind of emotionally interwoven into the kind of emotional fabric of the organization? Or how is it working for you? For the guys I interviewed, a lot of them had utilitarian relationships. One was saying that her closest relationship was with this guy who she had no idea what was going on in his world. There's a lot of show, and things got even more competitive the more senior one got. And because you were being evaluated on transactions, that's what you were evaluating your relationships on. Yeah. Does this make sense? Any comments? Yeah. So the third stage in the process, okay, there's a little bit more here, which I've spoken to. The third stage is the loss of meaning. So the problem here with many people is that in the existential sense of the word, they were not choosing meaning that was deeply meaningful or that provided them with a strong enough rudder in the world. So, for example, feeding your starving family is meaningful, but buying another Lamborghini is less meaningful. So if you have kind of materialist forms of meaning, they offer less value the more you have. And so the meaninglessness can pervade one's work. So other ways in which meaning was lost was becoming sidelined and being impotent. People need to have traction in the world. Then there was this absolutely fascinating flow of commentary from the leaders around absurdity. So basically, corporates are absurd. They're absurd. Stuff happens for no reason at all. Very often organizations make money in spite of themselves, not because of themselves. Politics, agendas, expediencies tend to dominate decision making, and often this can make activities in an organization pretty absurd. Things just seem to happen. Then there was quite a lot of talk around meaning and creating meaning. So this really interesting idea that people think that meaning is going to be granted to them, and that it will naturally come with the job, and that one doesn't need to be active in creating meaning. So I think that was quite a big, that's a very big piece that you could use in coaching, is that meaning is not automatic. You have to create it, and you can create meaning out of anything. You know, you can be, I mean, I'm thinking of these guys, FMCG in Dubai, selling deodorants or whatever, and you can create meaning in many, many different ways, even in ways that don't relate to the product. So these guys had meaningful jobs because they felt like the underdogs in the market, and they were out there proving themselves. That was meaningful to them. Yeah. And trauma and addiction, the meaninglessness of that. I feel like I'm going really fast. I got myself into a right royal panic about timing, but I just realized I can go a little bit slower now. Does anybody want to comment on meaning? Loss of meaning. No? Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
For me, it's a bit like, it's so interlinked. So, but this is just my 2 cents. It's like, so, you know, you spoke about the loss of self. For me, as soon as that happens, I've lost meaning, because, okay, but this is very Enneagram related. So like I lead with a 3. So my identity very much links to work. And now in the corporate world, if I've lost my sense of identity, or if I am questioning the identity in which a corporate is wanting me to like adapt to, or to mirror back to them, and I don't want to fit into that box, then I lose my sense of meaning. And then it's almost like, do I regress into an identity I don't want to be, or do I play the role? And then it's almost like you could fall back into that automatic sense of like, okay, well, it's not who you are, but this is what's required of you, so you're just going to continue to do it.
Yes.
And you feel miserable because at the end of the day, you feel like you're not adding value, you're not living your authentic or true self, which is sad, because you know, then it goes against all that research that Brene Brown talks about authenticity. And then you wonder whether corporates actually are a breeding ground for authenticity, or is that just like this idealistic thing that we're all spewing? Because ideally that would be great to be authentic at work, but can you really be authentic at work? I don't know, that's just a thing that keeps popping up in my mind.
Yeah, I love that. And I wonder how, you know, just to continue that story of when you're at work and they're wanting you to be an identity you don't want to be, and your work is no longer meaningful. What happens to your relationship with money? Do you kind of, how does that work?
It's like, for me, it's like, obviously you have to put bread on the table and stuff, but like, I think I've seen so many people, and even myself, like leaving organizations and taking pay cuts and stuff because I'd rather be my authentic self and keep my identity than be some sort of prostitute or concubine, corporate prostitute or concubine, just and then be paid for that. But I can see Alistair's laughing and giggling, but it really is. It's like you're selling your soul. So for me, it's like I'd rather be paid less, but that's just me. So I don't like, I used to be someone who would be like, you can pay me, everyone's got a price, so you can pay me what you want and I'll be who you want me to be. But I've completely outgrown that. But there is definitely like a relationship with money. I think you will get people who may not feel that way, and who, you know, the more money they get paid, they may feel more obliged to fit the mold that they're being asked to fit. Or you may get people who are more rebellious and be like, well, I don't think you can put a price on authenticity. I'm not going to sell my soul for it. I don't know. Maybe I'm not answering your. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. This is just my thoughts.
It's all good. It's all good and stuff that relates. I mean, for my participants, they would negotiate really hard for money. Quite a lot of them. Like, if I'm going to be here and I'm going to be amputated, you damn well going to pay for me. Then they would be happy for about a month, and then it would peter off, and then it would be wage negotiations next year, and it would be up, and then they'd stay again, and then they'd get more share options, and because these were very senior guys that were getting all sorts of perks. But they negotiated harder. They also started doing lots of dodgy stuff, which I spoke about earlier, you know, because for most of these guys, they didn't know that they were stuck, or they struggled to take responsibility for their part of the relationship. And so for many of them, they felt that they'd been victimized by an organization. Now, they had it to some extent, but they were also responsible for staying, for accepting the deal.
Yeah, it's tough. It's almost like resentment. Like if you were in a relationship, like if you talk about partners, like husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, it's like, yes, you play a role in staying in a toxic relationship. And then you almost become rebellious and resentful towards that person. It can also be an organization or other leaders, but like, yeah, and then because you're losing your sense of identity, and then you're asking more of this person or this organization, thinking it will make you more happy, but actually it won't, because you no longer are you're not fulfilled, there's no meaning. But it's such a tough spot, because like if we had to remove money, then sure, but yeah.
And
I think some people are more willing to be amputated or bewitched and stuff because they have a family that they have to, it's the sacrifices that they make, but it does make you, it certainly made me less of a person. That's my opinion.
The thing is, there's a lot of bad faith that goes around at this point as well. We're talking very senior executives with years of share options and loads of money, all saying to themselves that they need an enormous amount of money to live off every month. So yeah, I mean, it's a form of bad faith. Most of them assumed that if they were to leave that job, any other job wouldn't be as well paid. It's a lot of kind of assumptions that go on around money.
Yeah, that assumption of the golden handcuffs.
Yeah.
Which a lot of my friends, I mean, if you look at Sasol employees and stuff, the engineers there and stuff, they get paid a crap load of money, and unfortunately, some of them do. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy where they do believe that they won't get paid elsewhere the same amount. They won't. But then there will be other companies where the opposite is true, like you are busy insinuating.
Yeah.
It's
so there's a lot of kind of lying to oneself to stay in these very bad situations and not actively kind of take responsibility for their life. For some guys, there's a very conscious trade-off. I'm going to do this and I'm going to give my children a very brilliant lifestyle. Or I actually love traveling first class around the world, and I'm happy to trade off being in the office from time to time, as long as I can stay on those airplanes from time to time.
No, definitely. No, I hear you.
So back to this story here. And now that we've got a bit more knowledge about how the system works, we come in, we adapt ourselves, we either amputate or become bewitched somehow by organizations. I was very bewitched by PricewaterhouseCoopers. I couldn't believe I'd got in, and that I now was this brilliant person. I was this consultant, and I would do most things to retain that status. That's a form of being bewitched. And some people lose a lot of their inner life in a sort of a way of operating as the walking dead. So you go in, you amputate, you do the job really well for a bit, but then the context changes and you can't change. And so you have no traction, you get hurt, you think you're being rejected by the organization and victimized by the organization. But the organization has changed the contract and you can't fulfill it because you don't have a rich enough inner world to be agile. Then you stay in the job, you don't understand why you have no traction, you get angry, sometimes you can stay for many, many years, and you extract the last meaning of the job, which is often financial. I'll take whatever money I can at this point. And then you complete the process. For some people, this means leaving the organization. For two of my sample participants, that meant finding another job in the organization. But everybody went through a process of trying to make sense of what had happened to them. And for many of them, they experience a sense of worthlessness for having got themselves into this situation. And then, so working through that allowed them to reconnect more fully with who they were. For those that allowed themselves to process it. For others, they went back in and did the same thing all over again. And in fact, one of the CEOs that I interviewed has done exactly that. Replicated the same pattern. So, what I wanted to do was maybe to have a discussion with you about how you're experiencing this information. What does it mean for you as coaches? How could you use it? Yeah. Go. Karen, you want to chat?
So this is absolutely fascinating, Julia, and I really like the way how you've defined it as the three losses. And it highlights so much how the person has to be aware that they're stuck and has to want to move on. Because I'm just thinking how much this is, they always say corporate favors the 3, the 7, and the 8 of the Enneagram types. And this is so much around, I don't know how it relates necessarily to the 7, but so much around the 3 and the 8 is exactly this corporate trance. And yet, for a lot of executives, this is what they want. This is what they know. This is what works for them. I mean, I have a friend who went the whole corporate route, got to the top. I could see when loss of meaning happened now that I reflect on it, because everything became about how many more days to my retirement. It became all about money. So it was counting the days that were left. It became all about the package that they were going to get. And eventually they did retire. And what they've now done is they've gone and got themselves elected to chairman of a body corporate. They're repeating that whole cycle again. There's no money in this, in this round of, but it's the whole corporate, it's the whole cycle again, needing to be in charge, needing to be in control, needing to perform at a certain way, needing to rescue, it's just that whole feeding of the ego again. And for them, they believe this is working. Now, when do they jump off? I mean, they could be in this trance for the rest of their lives and it could actually serve them.
Well, that is the story. I kind of feel like it's not necessarily serving our planet so much. And on a systems level, it's not, it's useful to have people who are bewitched or amputated and dead to do jobs. But, we're talking about leadership, so a little bit, more directionality. And I suppose that's the piece, is when you're connected to yourself, you have better capacity to make choices that are going to benefit more people. It feels like addiction, because the big thing that we and the participants were avoiding was going inside and potentially finding there was nothing there. The void. What happens if I'm nothing? If I take off my corporate clothes, I'm nothing. And I've had examples of this. I'm keeping my corporate clothes because even though I'm not there now, one day I might need to go and wear them again. And I look at them with longing, because it was a very certain and satisfying identity that I used to have. And it reminds me of a time when I felt potent. But what's happened is the context has changed and the identity has remained the same. So thank you for that. Alistair.
Yeah, I'll be quick. For me, the biggest takeaway and where it will be applicable is where you mentioned something about this thing being baked, this culture being baked into the system. So personally, I feel it's very difficult to change a person. And that's why you found some of these participants went back to their old ways. But once you fix let's say the corporate culture, then people would just follow that culture, that the new culture that's not necessarily money focused, or have a balance between the money focus and people being actually fulfilled in their job as well.
Yeah, I think we might have to do some radical restructuring of how we think about organizations. And it's not just organizations. In my thesis, I mapped it right up to shareholder structure, because the whole shareholding structure works to use humans as objects, as tools, as assets. But not only that, we as coaches are culpable in creating and generating the system. Business schools, coaches, for us, coaching people to become better assets, better tools, rather than better humans. There's been quite a lot written around this that is emerging, and I've got a very nice doctorate from Australia, if any of you are interested. But to change our coaching style from one that is less performance orientated to one that is really just about building inner richness and learning how to have better relationships and learning how to create meaningful lives. Those three things, if we can do that for our clients, we're having a sustainable impact. I think a better chance at changing the system. I, for one, want corporates to exist. I can't tolerate the idea of them all falling away. They hold most of the power in the world. I'm more interested in influencing than destroying. How are the rest of you doing? Thank you, Alistair.
I've got to say, it's a bit depressing, illuminating, but I feel a bit depressed.
Yeah.
Seeing this, and I don't just see it in corporate. I mean, I'm mostly working with entrepreneurial businesses, and I'm seeing the same pattern. Now that I see it in front of me, it's the same thing.
But it's not necessarily depressing. It's just a pendulum type thing. So it works for relationships, because, you know, when we go into a relationship, then maybe our partner says, I really like you in high heel shoes, Kate. Or if you put that cat on your head, then maybe you do it more often as a chance to please your partner. And so you start adapting your identity in a relationship as well. So I suppose it's like a pendulum kind of thing, that you do too much adaptation and then things get stuck and the world says, no, take back who you are. And then you go into the opposite extreme sometimes, and you become tricky to your partner and need to do everything different. So I suppose it's a bit of a pendulum kind of swing, but the pendulum doesn't need to swing as far if we keep bringing in new identities that are adaptive to the changing context. I love that. I'm saddened by and love that idea. Yes, it is depressing, and perhaps it's just one of those cycles of being human and balancing being for ourselves and being for others.
Yeah, so I feel very called as well at the same time to really, as a coach, build awareness with people, around what they might be going through before it gets to a place of like full stuckness, like really, open the windows and put the lights on as you can see the process starting. The first loss kicking in. I saw a client this morning where I can feel the first loss, and I didn't quite know how to articulate it with him, but that feels so important.
Yeah. So as they join the organization, ask, as a coach, you can ask how much of you're going to take in, what parts you're going to keep, what you're going to not keep, how you're going to balance that. How much of yourself are you going to show? And I suppose these are the same questions you could ask in relationship, because the more of you that's present, the more agility you have. And I think, for me, just looking at my own attachment pattern, I think the attachment pattern piece is phenomenal for identifying the kind of role that you're going to take in an organization. Like, for example, I was always the bad child. And so I became the bad child in all the organizations I worked in. And just leads to stuckness. The same old fight again and again and again. Yeah.
What does that mean, Julia? What does it mean, bad?
My own badness. Rebellious, sort of rebellious, the one that never followed instructions, the one that was never organized, focused, clean, well-behaved, all of those kind of things.
And is it, yeah, it's kind of funny that it's bad, because the opposite would be to kind of just cave in and be, and then people would call you nice and easygoing and sweet. And I think that's just the same. They're just the same stuff, you know, it's just two other sides.
Yes, two responses, yeah, to the same thing.
Yes, so you were sweet and bad.
Yes, and that's the proper identity, to be both of those things, not just to be one, because it's like chopping off a leg. So I suppose that's, I mean, it took me so long to figure this out. I don't know why. I'm not
Yes,
always...
we don't stay on the one side. We don't chop off anything.
That's the trick.
Mm.
And these guys were identified with being the good children, the good ones. So they couldn't be wrong. They couldn't be responsible for how they got stuck. That was difficult for them. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Any other comments on that?
Julia, I didn't catch the whole piece of that, but the one thing I could, you know, quite a lot of what I saw was very familiar. I could see I've spent the last, I'd say, 10 years on the floor with CEO, a couple of different CEOs and CFOs, and have seen a kind of the loss of meaning in particular, where I've always just imagined it, because one can see that so much, that when one reaches that sort of a level in a corporate, actually what happens is that decisions are made by boards, and that there's a sense of powerlessness as well, that and there are particular individuals on boards who are actually the ones calling the shots. I've definitely seen that. I've also seen meaninglessness in the sense that I mean, not now, because this whole floor is completely empty and has been since March last year, but a very strong memory when it was full was I always knew where he was by the loudness of the laughs on the floor. So there are about 60 other people on this floor. And I always thought it must be so strange for him to walk around on this floor, and whatever he says, everyone's laughing much louder than they would ordinarily with anyone else, simply because he's carrying this power. And I was like, that must make it incredibly hard to know where you stand or who you are, because everyone just thinks you're the funniest, most amazing guy on the planet, because they're all trying to be your buddy. But I also, the one thing, and it's the one thing that I've wondered about people in that sort of position, is I can see the capitalist narrative that you had. I wondered about the power narrative, because one of the things that this current CEO has talked about is his very first day, classic 3, very first day of work, starting, it's at 21 stories, starting of this building on the ground floor, and deciding he was going to walk up the stairs. And as he walked up, he knew that one day, he walked up to the top on his first morning. When he got to the top, and he knew that he would one day be CEO. So he was like, but that thing of power, and of the attraction of power that comes with that position. And I wondered, because I've seen various CEOs fizz on that power and get a high from that power as well. And I wondered about that there's loss, but also but how strong power is in terms of, apart from cash, in terms of filling up a person? I don't know. Did that come out at all in your work?
Yeah, a bit. It wasn't clear because it could go one of two ways. The one is that it was a source of meaning to be powerful. And the other way was it was like a compensatory mechanism for not being powerful. Or not having meaning. So maybe your job's meaningless, and then you go and you shout at the person on the bottom floor and they listen to you. And that makes you feel like you have traction in the world and that you're valuable, even though on the 5th floor you feel like you're useless. I don't know if that's making sense. So I think it isn't, in Voss's work, it is an outcome in its own right. But Voss kind of talks about it a little bit differently as self-development, and it's all individualistic, like what can I take from the world? What can I own? Who can I be in charge of? Yeah, so absolutely. I always think it's so funny, you know, when you sit at kind of global excos or global boards, and then like someone will say, okay, this is now EMEA, and over there's the head of the Middle East. I mean, really? It's hilarious. It's not the head of the Middle East. It's, you know, that whole self-aggrandizement thing. Maybe I'm just cynical. I don't think this renders corporates, you know, unusable. I just think that if we want to be useful as coaches, we need to think about helping the leaders that we work with to be more of themselves. I've given you quite a summary version of this whole doctorate. Anybody else wanting to make a comment?
Can I ask a bigger question, Julia, for a second about, and feel free to cast this one aside. You know, I think about corporates and, you know, this potential for moving from this performing stage into later state, you know, getting unstuck if they're indeed stuck at that stage in some places. And but given some of your narrative about how challenging internalizing can be to performance potentially, like how are you seeing, you know, this unstuck movement up this chain of development, and how challenging internalizing can be for individual leaders, let alone potentially organizations?
Todd, thank you. And thank you for inviting me into my favorite subject to moan about, which is mindfulness. So my worry about mindfulness, and I'm very much a lone wolf, so you don't have to defend mindfulness, is that it can take some of the pain out of our inner worlds. And when we don't have that pain, we don't act. It might act as a bit of a narcotization. Of course, I am an Enneagram 8, and I do love intensity. So, and I hate sitting still. So, you know, if don't feel you need to defend mindfulness against a person such as I just think that pain is really useful. So, if we spend our whole life in our professional career not really feeling pain, when we start to feel pain as we go into internalizing, it becomes unbearable. So the kinds of people that we need in corporate to transform can't stay. It's too painful. And I think that means we get left with more conventional thinkers that might not help organizations find their way into the world more fully. And this goes for investors as well. If you've dealt with asset management companies, it's all about numbers. And yeah, it's all about numbers. That's the only way to make sense of what organizations do. And in that world, in that world of positivism, then yeah, you're going to get humans as objects. I don't know if that's very useful. I want to advocate pain. I want to put my hand up for pain and say, let's go out and let's get painful. Let's feel it. Because that's what we can use to guide us.
May I say something, Julia?
Yes, you can. You can even defend mindfulness, or my version of it.
No, I'm unfortunately completely on your page about, you know, our people are dying, let's send them to yoga. Yeah. I'm not a big fan of deceit, and obviously love this topic of yours because it's about truth and self-deception and false consciousness. I mean, it's dealing with false consciousness at every level, which I think is so beautiful, and the way that you've done it is so subtle and it's got such depth. So thank you for doing this work. It's really wonderful. So yeah, I'm very, very much on your page.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Ingrid. I want to just end off with some stuff, which I hoped you would take home. And that's really that, you know, we come from the system. And so our job is to detach slightly from the system. And how we're going to do that is to build our own inner worlds, to not go on those websites by those global coaches that are so slick, to not build these wrong versions of ourselves, these perfect versions, and sell them to clients and make clients believe that this perfection actually is possible. So it's about how we are with our clients and how imperfect and rough and authentic and real we are. And then that can allow clients to do the same for themselves. And that when we're coaching, we spend less time on coaching for performance around transactions. And we spend more time on coaching for inner worlds, developing new identities, building the capacity to self-reflect, possibly not through a narcotized lens. You know, it's, if you've had a glass of wine, one's self-esteem always looks better or worse. It always gets influenced. So let's try and look at ourselves more clearly. Okay, I'm not going to introduce mindfulness now. And then about having relationships. I don't think we know how to have relationships. And I, for one, struggle hugely with this subject. I don't think we know what's involved in relationships and how to share and how to be all of ourselves and build trust. And I think that there's plenty of work in that for us as coaches. And then the meaning space, you know, look for meaning that is deeply meaningful around self-transcendence. And I love this because it's incredibly exciting to have this idea that, you know, I don't always need to be this version of myself. Isn't that interesting? I don't know, I don't have to be this thing because I'm always emerging and transcending who I am today. Of course, this is all a bit extreme, but the idea is there, that I don't have to be this. I can be something else. And the idea with stuckness is not to eliminate it because it has value for us, but rather to reduce the swing of the pendulum. So we get in and out of stuckness every day, more flexibly, and we can learn from our context as we interact with it. Any last comments? I'm feeling like I've done a disservice to my research, because you know when you've done something for like 5 years and you're so bored of it, and although you love it, I have a difficult relationship with my research.
So Julia, I came in late and I've been quiet throughout.
Yeah.
But your, I do have some thoughts around what you've said. I think that what you're presenting is incredibly powerful, actually, on many levels and in many contexts. But your piece about the narcotization that can happen and the numbing that we do kind of just, I think, pushed me into commenting. So, I mean, the one thought that I have linked to what you've been talking about, which I think links to what we can offer as facilitators or coaches, is really to remember how incredibly difficult it is to see the system that we're in when we're in it. And we can be experts in systems, but not see our own system.
Yes.
And not see how embedded we are in our own systems, to our own detriment.
Yes.
So that was kind of the one thought I had. And then you also talked about something about taking responsibility. And I think that and it linked to pain. So I suppose those were the things that, there were a couple of things that you said that really kind of triggered for me. So the other piece was the piece about pain. And I think it's incredibly painful to own, when we take ownership of our role in a system and of perpetuating a system, that is enormously painful, but it's also the place of empowerment and of reinvention. But so it's this whole piece, and I think, and that's what linked for me with the numbing. So I think we often numb in various ways, use different things to numb ourselves from the pain of really being truthful and seeing the system that we're in and how we are keeping ourselves in unhealthy systems. So I suppose it just speaks again to the power of the objective view and perspective, which coaches or systems workers or facilitators offer. So I think the research was incredibly powerful, and I wouldn't be bored by it if I were you.
Well, it's 5.5 years down the line, but thank you very much. I'm not actually that. So when I hear you speak about it like that, I know that it is incredibly useful. And that we as coaches need to step into the role of doing something about it, rather than trying to polish up our clients as assets or tools. Unfortunately, this puts us in a very tricky position with our clients, the corporates, because that's what they want. So how do we be, and, how do we not be one or the other, but both? And how do we create a space for authenticity in the world? Okay, so I will send you a copy of the slides, all of you that came. Megan, Biffy, do we have your email? She's not there.
I am here, sorry. Yeah, you do have my email address. I will send it I'll put it on the group again, but yes, you do have my email address. I did the level 1 with Euphoria.
Okay, so that's what I know you, So you haven't been tortured by the level 2 yet.
I've seen the ads for level 3, but need to get to level 2.
Right, good. Okay, good. Thank you. And I think we've got everyone else's emails as well. So thank you guys for coming. And Andrea, what have we got next week?
Level 3 teams with Lucille.
Oh yes, it's teamwork. Level 3 teams. Okay, so working with the tool and how to implement it with teams. And then after that, it's Narayan from Toronto talking about systems, using adult development with systems. So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. And we'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Thanks, Julia.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.